Hi.
Greetings. We've reached Matthew 13, verse 24, the parable of the wheat and the weeds. And we're going to read it first from the ESV. I'll read from the ESV, and then Vivian will follow up from the NIV. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, 'Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' So the servants said to him, 'Then do you want us to go and gather them?' But he said, 'No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.' He put another parable before them, saying, 'The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches.' He told them another parable. 'The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour, till it was all leavened.'"
Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. "I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world." Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear."
Now, we mentioned when we did the analysis of the first parable, the sower, that there were complications even there. That the responses that Christ enumerates in his explanation of the parable make it very obvious that the varied responses to the sowing of the word will create problems, because most people will hear the word in the context of church and community.
Yeah.
But now we've got 3 more parables, all of which suggest to me that the fallacies that we were prone to as witnesses are totally erroneous. I.e., do you get the impression from these 3 new parables that there's ever going to be a pure religion?
No. Like the first one where there was varied results, you get wheat and weeds growing together in this one. And I couldn't help thinking, when you're gardening, for me it's lack of experience. I let everything just come up because I'm afraid I'll throw out the vegetable in my effort to get rid of a weed. I can't identify them clearly, but even if you could, I know when you're pulling a weed, you often do pull up something that you don't want to at the same time. So there's wisdom in this. But we would, in our way of thinking as witnesses, I think we would want to pull all the weeds out and have the wheat field completely wheat and separate by itself.
Yeah. And that's the way the Jews felt too and thought, i.e., when the Messiah's kingdom comes, it's going to be good for the good guys, and it's going to be very bad for the evil.
A nice clean separation
Yeah.
between the two.
So you can't see a pure religion here to the very end when the harvesting is final. But you can't even see a total apostasy, which we were trained to see as witnesses. Because like you said in verse 30, let both grow together.
Yeah.
One is not going to strangle the other. The weeds are not going to overgrow the field. It's the master's field, and we've missed that point here. It's his field, and in verse 41, the harvesters are gathering out of his kingdom. So do we think of his kingdom as being set up in the first century? Because I think when you're a witness, you're trained to think of the passage Daniel 2:44, where when the kingdom comes, it will destroy all these
Everything will
kingdoms.
be accomplished in one swoop.
But we know the last days, even the Watchtower admits this, the last days began when Jesus Christ came. His kingdom was set up, at least spiritually, started with the church, of course. So then it makes sense that in verse 41, it says, the Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those which do iniquity. We're trained to think that happened, the harvest happened starting in 1914, and that gathering has been going on since. But it's very plain here that it's at the very end that this separation occurs. So that absolutely for sure here, although there's no pure religion anywhere in sight, and there's no total apostasy either, what is for sure is there's no clean separation until the very end.
The other thing I noticed in the way we read this is when I've read about parables before, usually we take one of the parables and then we dissect it. Like we read it on its own, then dissect it. And we do that with each of the parables. But having read this one and the explanation coming afterwards, and in between you've got these two other parables, the one about the woman kneading and yeast into the dough, and then it gradually ferments, and the other one about the mustard seed being small and then getting bigger. Now I've heard both takes on it, that being a positive, the gospel being spread all over the world, in both cases.
The church conquering the world.
Yeah, but I've also heard it as a negative, because it's been pointed out that birds in Scripture tend to be have a negative application to them, and yeast also as corruption.
Almost always.
So just looking at it this time and seeing where it's set, to me, I'm favoring now the negative, because it seems to be set in between the explanation, the weeds parable and the explanation of it.
Yeah.
It's in between them. So maybe it's pointing out to us that you're going to see something good, but something bad mixed, like this gradual bad stuff within it.
Well,
within something good.
That seems to be, for me anyway, the thing you can't deny in it, whichever way you go, positive or negative, with the leaven.
Yeah.
You've got to see the gradual aspect of it as being the stress here, that it's happening in secret, which would indicate that there's not going to be an apostasy at the beginning, sudden, after the apostles die, but rather right at the end.
Yeah, or a slow, slow negatives in between.
Yeah.
In places.
All right, here's Ryle's comment. The parable of the wheat and tares, which occupies the chief part of these verses, is one of peculiar importance in the present day. It is eminently calculated to correct the extravagant expectations in which many Christians indulge as to the effect of missions abroad and of preaching the gospel at home. May we give it the attention which it deserves. He seems to be alluding here to the dominant thought in Puritan circles and in American evangelicalism, that the thought here is that the church will succeed in conquering the world before Christ returns. What we tend to call postmillennialism. He says, in the first place, this parable teaches us that good and evil will always be found together in the professing church until the end of the world. The visible church is set before us as a mixed body. It is a vast field in which wheat and tares grow side by side. We must expect to find believers and unbelievers, converted and unconverted, the children of the kingdom and the children of the wicked one, all mingled together in every congregation of baptized people. The purest preaching of the gospel will not prevent this. In every age of the church, the same state of things has existed. It was the experience of the early fathers. It was the experience of the reformers. It is the experience of the best ministers at the present hour. There has never been a visible church or a religious assembly of which the members have been all wheat. The devil, that great enemy of souls, has always taken care to sow tares. The most strict and prudent discipline will not prevent this. Episcopalians, Presbyterians, and Independents all alike find it to be so. Do what we will to purify a church, we shall never succeed in obtaining a perfectly pure communion. Tares will be found among the wheat. Hypocrites and deceivers will creep in. And worst of all, if we are extreme in our efforts to obtain purity, we do more harm than good. We run the risk of encouraging many a Judas Iscariot and breaking many a bruised reed. In our zeal to gather up the tares, we are in danger of rooting up the wheat with them. Such zeal is not according to knowledge, and has often done much harm. Those who care not what happens to the wheat, provided they can root up the tares, show little of the mind of Christ. And after all, there is deep truth in the charitable saying of Augustine, those who are tares today may be wheat tomorrow.
Well, if only we'd read this before, when we were witnesses. Are we inclined to look for the conversion of the whole world by the labors of missionaries and ministers? Let us place this parable before us and beware of such an idea. We shall never see all the inhabitants of earth, the wheat of God, in the present order of things. The tares and the wheat will grow together till the harvest. The kingdoms of this world will never become the kingdom of Christ, and the millennium begin until the King himself returns. Are we ever tried by the scoffing argument of the infidel that Christianity cannot be a true religion where there are so many false Christians? Let us call to mind this parable and remain unmoved. Let us tell the infidel that the state of things he scoffs at does not surprise us at all. Our Master prepared us for it 1800 years ago. He foresaw and foretold that his church would be a field containing not only wheat but tares. Are we ever tempted to leave one Protestant church for another because we see many of its members unconverted? Let us remember this parable and take heed what we do. We shall never find a perfect church. We shall spend our lives in migrating from communion to communion and pass our days in perpetual disappointment. Go where we will and worship where we may, we shall always find tares. Oh, that's very good. And I couldn't help but think the way we thought as witnesses, that you have to clean it all out and make it wheat, all wheat, no tares. But the tares, the wheat doesn't walk away from the tares.
Would that were possible, but
Yeah.
I'm glad it isn't.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen that way. We should be waiting on God and the angels at the harvest.
Yeah. And he couldn't know, as he wrote these words in the 1850s and 60s, he couldn't know that this tendency that he sees among Protestants to church hopping would develop into full-blown cults within that generation.
Yeah.
And Mormonism, Christadelphianism, Adventism, and Jehovah's Witnesses would all emerge, and lots more too, within the lifetime of J.C. Ryle himself.
And it's because they have this wrong-headed idea of the perfect church existing somewhere.
The fallacy, the quest for the perfect church, certainly not supported by these parables of Jesus. We'll put a link into why JW.org will fall and the church will stand, and specifically the video we did on the wheat and the weeds parable. And also that playlist, because it starts with a general introduction to the concept of did the church apostatize after the first century, and then gets into the parable of the sower. So the first several videos are all on these parables, so you might want to check them all out.